Welcome to Compelling Conversations, where law meets business. With your host, Dara Rosenbaum, founding partner and attorney at Rosenbaum & Taylor in New York. You can watch episodes on YouTube and listen through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and more. For prior episodes and free resources, go to www.rosenbaumtaylor.com/learn. Now here's the host of Compelling Conversations, Dara Rosenbaum.
Hello and welcome to Compelling Conversations and what promises to be a very compelling conversation with my guest today, Shauna Rourke. Shauna Rourke is a cyber liability consultant for Combs & Company, an insurance brokerage and consultancy headquartered in New York City. Shawn works with small and mid-sized businesses to mitigate the myriad of financial risks posed to their technology and data by internal and external threats. Shawn has spent over 25 years in the IT arena, including 12 years running a technology firm he co-founded. So he has a unique perspective on cyber risks and the potential disruptions faced by businesses in today's interconnected world. He's also well-versed in the growing cyber regulatory landscape, lending an experienced voice to the growing obligations that companies and their officers face when it comes to cyber incidents. Shawn gives frequent talks on the business impacts of cyber events. He sits on the boards of multiple private companies. He's a longtime mentor to students at his alma mater, Washington and Lee University, and through Rourke College's Executives on Campus Mentoring Program. He is also a CrossFit and Spartan coach, and also the host of the YouTube series, Did You Know That? So looking forward to this conversation, Shawn. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I appreciate the invite. Thank you very much.
Looking forward to it. So, all right, what's cyber insurance? Because I feel like everybody has their own thoughts on it, and I'm sure some of them are wrong.
Okay, let's dive right in. There's no warm-up with you. Okay,
yeah,
I got it. All right. So luckily I'm stretched out from this morning's workout, so I'm good to go.
Perfect.
Okay, so cyber insurance has been around for, 20, 30 years in different forms. Way back in the beginning, they called it computer insurance and whatnot. But essentially, cyber insurance now, by today's definition, 2022's definition, is essentially a policy, an insurance policy, that covers the technical workings of a business's IT infrastructure. Now, that is not all it covers, because there are some ancillary things that revolve around fraud committed against the business using electronic means and what have you. Mm-hmm. But essentially, you can think about it as anything technologically having to do with the business may be covered by a cyber insurance policy. Okay. It really takes a little bit longer than I think we have reasonably people's attention for this conversation to go into all those areas that it does and does not cover. But essentially, think about it. If it's plugged into the internet, it may fall under the cyber insurance policy. I will say this as a caveat. What it is not is an errors and omissions, or also known as a professional liability policy, mm-hmm. where that means you're doing work with technology, and those types of policies protect you when you make a mistake mm-hmm. With that technology. Cyber does not do that. E&O policies do that.
Gotcha. So let's just go back to you. How do you get from owning an IT company to now being a cyber insurance representative?
I wanted to sleep in on the weekends.
There you go.
The main points.
The motivation is strong.
Yeah. So as you said in my bio, I've been around technology for a very long time. And I co-founded a managed services company. It really wasn't called that back when we founded it. Mm-hmm. But essentially, it was an outsourced IT firm for businesses. And then I co-founded it with two friends of mine. And we were doing great. Mm-hmm. Except that we saw an evolution in terms of the necessity and reliance on technology by businesses, which mm-hmm. also changed their attitudes toward the technology and then toward the firm that was handling essentially its support and what have you. Mm-hmm. And really, it became a millisecond by millisecond business. And mm-hmm. I just decided about a little bit more than 6 years ago. I left my firm more than 6 years ago, but I just decided that, you know what, this was just not the lifestyle that I wanted anymore. I mean, for those of you who know mythology and whatnot, it's running an outsourced IT firm is like sitting under the sword of Damocles. You're just waiting for it to fall because it's eventually going to happen to everybody. And so it just wasn't what I wanted to do anymore. So I figured now's a good time. And luckily, I was friends with my co-founders first, and they gave me their blessing. Said best of luck. They still run the firm. But when we started the firm, I was the oldest. Now I look at them, and they're definitely much older than I am now. So it's worked out for everybody.
Yep. And the sort of Damocles, I guess, is probably likely to fall like, the middle of the night or early on Sunday morning.
Exactly. Well, I mean, when I was on call on the weekends, one of my responsibilities was to get up 3 a.m. to make sure some of our clients who traded in the Asian markets were good to go because the markets were going to be opening soon over there. And so you had to make sure that they were good to go. And that just didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah. So your hours are a lot better now.
Oh, much better. Thankfully, insurance carriers still work 9 to 5.
That's right. That's right. They do. So how did you get from leaving the managed IT company to insurance brokerage and consultancy?
By accident. So you know this because you know a little bit more of my history, but my wife actually owns the brokerage. She founded it a year after I founded my IT firm. And so I was actually only supposed to be there for a couple of weeks to install some new systems for her because she had some new business avenues opening up. And so she needed to keep better track of certain things. And so I was just there sort of installing it. And we had a conversation one day about cyber insurance. And she said, hey, until you find your next gig, take a look at this. You know, obviously the industry, you know what cyber insurance does and doesn't do. You could start talking to people about the coverage. And that was 6 years ago. So
and no plans to go anywhere.
Not yet, because I haven't reached everybody yet. Not everybody that I think should have cyber insurance has it.
Right.
So until I get to that point, right now I'm good. If I get an itch to go do something else, then maybe. But then Susan might have a problem with that. So we'll have to see how the home and work life would work out that way.
Fair enough. So I certainly have clients who contact me and we start doing kind of the audit of their procedures and their practices, and we talk about cyber insurance. And the response I get probably more often is, I'm a little guy, or I'm a small fish in a huge pond. Nobody really worries. No one's going to worry about me. I don't need cyber insurance. Or, some of the more, more colorful responses I've gotten, I'll clean them up. Or like, who needs my stuff? They can have it.
Right.
I know that your response to that is going to be pretty similar to mine, but obviously a lot more educated. So what's your response to that?
Well, I mean, mine is just from the insurance side. You obviously come at it from the legal side, but the two meet right at the crossroads of because what's happening now is that, no, you're not too small because a billion or more phishing emails get sent out every day. So you might end up clicking on something just by accident, not because they're targeting you, but just by accident. And if that happens, well, then you have to deal with the consequences of that. And depending on the types of data or the types of systems you have, there could be regulatory, civil, other types of consequences that you're going to have to deal with. And depending on the extent of the incident, you could have to pay 4 years out of pocket to remedy all the repercussions of that one mouse click.
Right.
And that's what people don't really think about, is that the tail or the length of time it takes to work out a cyber incident can get into years. There's going to be some that are going to hit a decade pretty soon that are still working through certain courts and whatnot. So no, you're not too small because you might just get caught by accident. Two, sure, great. They can have the data that you have. But if you have employee data, no, I don't want them to have my social security number. I don't want them to have my payroll or what have you. So you have to take steps not only to prevent, but also to recover from an event. You have to balance both of them. You really have to take steps to prevent, but there's no way to prevent 100% of the time. So you do have to take steps to build in a recovery plan. And that's where cyber insurance, for a lot of companies, is a cheat. Really is what it is. It's like a cheat code. If you hit the A button, the up arrow, and whatever other combination gets you to the top level. Cyber insurance can be that cheat code because what it allows you to do is actually leverage the experience of the breach response team that you get through that policy to essentially walk you through, okay, what do I have to do? Who do I have to notify? How do I have to notify? Do I have to give them anything like a year of fraud protection or what have you? What agencies do I have to notify? If you have cyber insurance, if there's a fine or if there's a civil case because somebody tries to sue you, well, then cyber insurance also provides you that. And as you know, court systems don't exactly run the 100-meter dash too quickly. So
they are not as speedy people. No.
So these take time, and they and it's not the time, it's the money that constantly gets spent on these incidents to recover from them. And a lot of businesses don't. If you get hit and you pay out of pocket, a lot of businesses, you don't hear about them because they're usually small, mid-sized businesses, but they do have to close up shop because they can't afford it.
It's a shame because these things are preventable. Now, on the prevention point, you said billion phishing emails every day. Is there education you'd recommend or training that you'd recommend that companies use with their employees so that they're not the ones clicking on the phishing emails?
Yeah, there are. I mean, that's become actually pretty big business now. Is what we refer to as end user training. Essentially, what you're trying to do is you're trying to help a person who's reading through your emails to understand, okay, that's how you find a suspicious email. This is what you use to identify it. But even legitimate emails, you should take your time to read them to make sure that, okay, this is legitimate. And if you have a question or if you're in doubt, find one of your IT folks, whether they be an outsourced company or internal resources, and just have them confirm for you. And it's especially true just before you and I started recording this, I was reading through some of my daily, I like to say I'm not a lawyer, but I play one on TV. You've heard me use that line quite often.
I like it.
I was reading through some of the current cases going on around cyber, and the 11th Circuit Court just affirmed a lower court's decision that the language in a crime endorsement on a cyber policy means that this one company did not have coverage for a funds transfer fraud. So they were duped into transferring funds to an unauthorized third party. But nowadays, really, from a practical perspective, that really shouldn't happen, because you should have procedures in place to where you verify via voice, via a phone number is legitimate, that yes, this change in my banking information is real, and the money's going to be sent there. You can no longer just take it on blind faith that this email's legitimate and go forward from there.
Yeah, I had a friend actually who had an incident where there was an email sent to the bookkeeper at the company, looking like it came from the CEO, that said, hey, we're going to do something different with payroll. Can you just make sure that everything is, that everything is going to this particular account so that the money can be, retrieved from there and payroll can be done. And the bookkeeper was like, yeah, sure, no problem. And did it right away. And they lost that week's payroll because it was transferred into an account, who knows where, with who knows who, because the bookkeeper didn't verify that it was actually her boss who sent the email.
Right.
And they looked at it later and it had the boss's name on the email, but the email address was something completely unrelated with, 100 digits and letters in it. And he said, didn't you look at this part? I didn't look at that part. I saw it was an email from you. I just read it and did it.
Yep. I mean, that's the thing. I don't trust any email in my inbox until I verify it. Now, it takes, I've been in the game a long time, so my ability to rifle through some of these and spot some of the attempts is a little bit better than others, but it's just a matter of practice. So that's where these training and education services have really come into play, is because of just that fact that you got to get people used to spotting potential fraud.
Let me run another issue by you, because I've had clients who've talked about ransomware. And the answer I usually get is, I don't need to worry about ransomware. Who wants my stuff?
Right.
And I know from our conversations what your answer to that is, but I'd like you to share your perspective on that.
It's the same one as the phishing emails. It's that, granted, they may not want your stuff, but you might get hit just because you're connected to the internet. And I don't think people appreciate that. You plug a machine into the internet, within seconds, the world knows. And I do mean the world. The world knows. I mean, when the internet first became a commercial entity back in the early to mid 90s, it was called the World Wide Web. Yep. And it is still that. So that means everybody knows. And so you're going to start to get on phishing lists and hacker sites and what have you, just simply because you plugged a computer or a device, your phone or what have you, into the internet. And in which case, then that immediately makes you a target.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be paranoid, but you do have to be diligent. And ransomware now can be delivered in innumerable types of ways to potential victims. So you do have to be cognizant of that fact. No, they may not be after you, but they could get you by accident.
And I think one of the other points that I've heard you make is that the bad actor may not want your data, but if the bad actor can keep you from you accessing your data, it's going to be worth money to you.
Sure. I mean, when the first ransomware started years ago, they were asking for $300 or thereabouts, because what they were doing is that they were judging a level to where you wouldn't fight them. You would just pay them. They would not. Typically, they give you the unencryption key, and then you go about your merry way. Well, now it's big business. I mean, even for the small folks, it's a 5-figure demand to get the unencryption key. So if your system is not set up to recover quickly from a ransomware attack, you may end up having to pay out 5 figures to get an unencryption key that may work on 80% of the data that's been encrypted, and then you'll have to figure out the rest. So it's imperative. That's the prevention part. And one of the prevention parts is to set up your IT in a way that you don't have to pay the ransom. And that's what I tell a lot of my prospects, clients, when talking to their IT folks, is that, look, how fast can we get back up and running if we have a ransomware attack?
Right.
And if the IT folks can't answer that, or if they're telling you a week, well, then you need to have a better discussion with them about how to bring that down to less than a day.
Right. Now, do you find it's an interesting concept to me that, it's sort of relying on these bad actors to be honorable, that once you give them the ransom, they give you the encryption key. I mean, is that normally how it happens, or do you find that they're not that straightforward in their dealings?
So I'll be honest with you, they were a lot more honorable, if you want to use that word.
It was the closest one I had.
Yeah, it's the only one I think we're going to be able to get by on a family show.
Yeah, fair enough.
So it's yes, they would give you the unencryption key. The thing was the encryption and the unencryption key. You normally, I wouldn't see 100% of the data be able to be decrypted. So you still had to scrounge around to find either backups or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, what I'm seeing it's a double ransom. So they'll ransom you for the unencryption key,
Mm-hmm.
and then they'll ransom you to not expose the data publicly.
Oh, okay.
So that has become the last couple of years since COVID, really, but it started before then, but it really picked up steam during COVID, is that they found that people were desperate not to have the data being made publicly.
Mm-hmm.
And because there's very little legal repercussions for these bad actors, they're not taking a real risk on doing this to you.
Right.
So they'll encrypt your data. They'll say, give me $10,000 for the unencryption key.
Right.
If you give them the 10 grand, or even if you don't give them the 10 grand, they'll come back to you and say, now give me 20 grand to not expose your data on the dark web or even on the web itself. Or else I make all this data public. And depending on the type of data that they're stealing, that could be very problematic for companies.
Right.
And so you pay it. I haven't heard too many stories. I have heard a couple of paying that ransom, that second ransom, and the data still being made public.
Mm-hmm.
But really what I hear is that the data is not made public. But again, they still have it.
Right.
So that threat means they've made a copy of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they still have that data so that they can come back to you at any time to ask for more if they wanted to. It's like any kind of blackmail.
Yeah.
The other thing you have to think about then is that every ransomware event then you have to treat as a data breach. And then that has further legal repercussions for you in terms of notifying people whose data it is or your client, notifying certain regulatory agencies, whether they be state or federal, and then possibly expecting some knocks on your door from civil litigation attorneys.
Right. Right. Because people's data has been compromised, and who knows what's out there and what they're going to do with it. Yeah.
Correct.
So you were saying that you were planning to stay around because, at least at this point, not everybody who needs cyber insurance has it. Who needs cyber insurance? Everybody needs it, or only certain categories, certain industries? What's your thoughts on that?
85% of businesses need it because they either do something with technology that they want to safeguard, or they do collect some data that could expose them to liability of some sort. So your professional service providers, lawyers, accountants, some types of outsourced CFOs or COOs, outsourced bookkeepers, outsourced IT firms, whatnot, all medical professions should have it. There are certain types of businesses, like cloud-based businesses, that you probably want to have it in place simply because of business interruption focus. That's the other thing, is that if you're relying on cloud service providers for your business, if that cloud service provider is attacked and goes down because of a cyber incident, well, if you have cyber insurance, there are certain provisions for third-party dependent services to where then, let's say you need a payment system on your e-commerce website, and that payment system gets compromised and you're down for a week. Well, then if you have cyber insurance, you can you may be able to file a claim under your policy to be compensated for that week that you were not able to process payments, which is a big deal. If you can't process payments on your website, you can't transact business. So there's lost revenue. And there is a thing called business interruption. Obviously, during COVID, business interruption became a very big term, but it's always been a big term in the cyber arena.
Now, what are you seeing, in speaking of COVID, what are you seeing in the cyber insurance world with respect to all these people who are now working remotely? They're now working at their you have a whole workforce working at their kitchen tables or in their home offices, as opposed to being in the office where maybe the controls are tighter.
So it's weird. So COVID what COVID actually exposed was how artificially low cyber premiums were because it was such a competitive market. Then as 2020 progressed and these claims, cyber claims or claims on these cyber insurance policies started to flood into insurance carriers, insurance carriers realized, oh, wait, we are way exposed here. Should there be a rash of cyber incidents, which there was in 2020 and most of 2021. And what they realized is that we are not priced properly. So I actually think we're beginning to reach a premium level that is sustainable for the carriers, but still affordable for the insureds. And since we are at that level, I think that's been the most dramatic change, is the change in premiums. The second big change is that insurance carriers have gotten stricter with their underwriting requirements. If you don't have multi-factor authentication across all your systems, you're not going to get cyber insurance. If you don't have, for some carriers, if you don't have somebody who's dedicated to actually being your IT person, whether they be outsourced or in-house, it's going to be very hard to get. What I have not seen on questionnaires or applications, I should say, is that question about remote workers. And I would have thought by now that question would have been there, but it's not, because what the remote workers really do is they expose these corporate infrastructures, to your point, to sort of managed environments. So let's say I'm working from home today. So I'm on my home Wi-Fi. And so if I work for a company, that company can't control my Wi-Fi. So if I had kids who are then streaming games or what have you, or on their iPads or what have you, and they were downloading all sorts of stuff, well, all of a sudden that stuff is on the same network that I'm connecting to my corporate network. And if there's a bad actor getting in through that, well, that bad actor is just going to ride my wave right into my business's infrastructure. I have not seen that, but that has become a big problem for a lot of companies, both big and small.
So the insurance companies aren't asking about it yet, but
Not yet.
It sounds like it's a vulnerable point for businesses.
It's a huge vulnerability, but I've not seen it asked for. Yeah, I mean, they just caught up to multi-factor authentication. So to my previous point, they don't run very fast. It takes a while to turn that aircraft carrier. So we'll see what happens in the next year or so.
But it sounds to me like even if the insurance companies aren't asking for that information yet, that it's something that small and mid-sized companies that we work with should be thinking about in terms of that vulnerability out there, using their home Wi-Fi or using their home computer that doesn't have necessarily all the safeguards you'd have at work.
Yeah, I mean, it's so my former business partners are two of the smartest people I know in technology. I mean, just really smart. They're creative in terms of what they see within their clients' infrastructures and whatnot. And that has become one of their biggest challenges. It's this new distributed workforce and how well they can lock down everything and still make it usable. That's the thing. You can make something almost unhackable, but then nobody's going to be able to use it. It'll be such lockdown that you can't move it or you can't do anything. So you have to find that happy balance. And there's really no such thing as balance. You're going to go one way or the other. Usually you're going to go less secure to make it easier to use. But that's the thing facing all IT departments, whether internal or external, is trying to figure out how to secure all these disparate connections to a very centralized data source and systems that are being targeted for some people. And you really have to be aware of that and be conscious of that and almost re-architect your entire cybersecurity methodology around this new physical reality. And it's one of the reasons why I do not envy them what they're doing anymore, because it's really, like I said, it's a millisecond by millisecond business.
Yep.
And thinking about it all day, every day now.
It's got to be exhausting.
Yeah.
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 So there's about 15% of businesses, you said, that probably don't have the same immediate need for cyber insurance, or maybe have less of a need. What categories would you put those in?
So I live in New York City, and the first one I always think about are bodegas.
Okay.
Little mom and pop corner store that has a credit card swipe, but they're not responsible for the credit card swipe. They have a third party who provides that. So that third party has to be PCI compliant.
Mm-hmm. What's PCI?
So PCI is a federal standardization, security standardization when it comes to credit card processing.
Okay.
How you handle credit card processing, how you handle the data that you collect through credit card processing and whatnot. So a PCI compliance worksheet is, I don't know, last time I saw one was 8 to 10 pages long, a very small legal type, of which I'm sure you're used to reading and whatnot.
Oh, yeah. And writing.
And writing, exactly. I won't blame you for it, but I blame your kin, your other legal kin, for it. But it's a very onerous process. So somebody like a small mom and pop bodega shop is not going to go through that process. So you get a third party who has to deal with all that.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, they're not keeping the data from their transactions.
Right.
They're not taking my email address. They're not taking my name. Even on the credit card side, they don't see any of that. They just see the money in their bank account, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So folks like that, I know some women who run networking groups. They collect email addresses. They have some usernames and passwords, but it's only to log in to schedule your attendance at meetings. They don't really need it because. I mean, I could find your email address just like I could find your phone number through the white pages previously.
Right.
So that's no longer for me, personal identifiable information, or PII.
Right.
So folks who are not collecting any kind of information that could really identify Dara as you, and this is your home address.
Right.
Or this is your driver's license number, your social security number. As long as you're not collecting anything that can really readily identify you,
right,
then you're in pretty good shape. If you're not doing anything with technology that could put your clients or customers or other people are relying upon, then you don't really need it in that instance. The percentage of businesses is obviously, I think, shrinking because data is becoming more and more ubiquitous. But again, there's going to be certain businesses that aren't going to need it. You have to do your own self-audit or find a broker like myself to have a conversation with and say, hey, this is what I do. This is what I collect. This is how I generate revenue. Because a lot of times, people will tell me, well, this is what I do. And then I ask them how they get paid. And all of a sudden, all sorts of different things come up. And I'm thinking, okay, now we're in a different territory. So how you generate revenue is usually the first question I ask, and then work my way back from there.
Right. Got it. So this is a question I love to ask people. What is one thing that you've learned along the way in your career or in your life that you wish you'd known earlier?
We should have started that at the beginning. And then we could that the whole time.
A whole nother show.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, one, it's easier to fill a market need than try to create one.
Okay.
My first business that I started back in the early 90s, I tried to create a market need, or I thought I was filling a market need, but there was no market need yet.
Okay.
I was a few years, myself and the person I tried it with, we were a few years too early. And it had to do with the internet, but the internet back then was not the internet of today.
Right.
The other thing is that, look, it goes back to something my wife wrote a book and about mentors that she's had along her journey, and her dad had a line for her, and it's good enough for a family show. He told her, "Be careful of the toes you step on today, because they may be attached to the ass you have to kiss tomorrow."
Ooh, I like that one. That's a smart one.
I mean, it goes back to don't burn the bridges. It's just much more colorful.
That's true, and much kind of more memorable, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's what I learned. And I tell a lot of my mentees this. I was a tremendous worker. If you had me as an employee, I was a tremendous worker. But I was a terrible employee because I questioned everything. I didn't do it in a very politic way. And so I didn't create a lot of friends in managerial positions. And I realized very early on, it's because I wanted to be the general. I didn't want to be the soldier. I wanted to be the general.
Yeah.
So my whole working life has always been about trying to get to doing something that I manage and control. And so I think that's the best lesson I essentially sort of stumbled upon. It's been promoted by other people, but I call it the person in the mirror test. The easiest person to lie to is that reflection in the mirror. And I think the more honest you are about what motivates you, what your objectives are, the easier life would be. And I realized early on, I wanted to be the general.
I like it. Let's get the name of Susan's book, because I think it's a great one, and I'd like to share it with everybody.
Sure. So she published it on her dad's birthday, February 22nd. He passed away in 2018, but it's called Pancakes for Roger. His name was Roger Combs. He was, in his civil life, he was a county prosecutor and a circuit judge in Missouri, and then spent 39 years in the military and retired as a 2-star general. So meeting him the first time was a bit of an experience because he's a guy who grew up on a dairy farm in Northwest Missouri. I think his house was the first to have electricity in 1950 something, I think, and whatnot. And so, I mean, grew up around cows, horses, wheat, and soybeans and whatnot, and was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, which is actually, he died from Agent Orange related throat cancer. So he had a pretty amazing career. And so she wanted to write a book. It's called Pancakes for Roger, a mentorship guide for slaying dragons. So basically, while it's an ode to Roger, but it's also a thank you to all the mentors she's had in her life. And it's a whole bunch of vignettes about those mentors. And what she's going to do is that a portion of the profits will go to the University of Missouri's Law School's Veterans Clinic, which helps veterans navigate the claims process with the VA. And because the VA admits this, on average, it takes veterans 7.5 years to get a claims decision. Either it's a rejection or an acceptance, but 7.5 years. And so Missouri Law School and Syracuse Law School were the only two currently that have these dedicated veterans clinics. And since Susan's a graduate of the University of Missouri and Roger was a graduate of the University of Missouri Law School, that's where we're focusing our efforts.
Terrific. I love that. We'll certainly put a link to the book when we post the episode.
That would be great. Be very much appreciated, because I would actually like to retire. So if I can make her a world-renowned author, that would be
that's perfect.
I just become a valet and whatnot.
Well, so. we are here to help.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
So how do people find you, Sean?
combsandco.com. You can find the company. You can always find me on LinkedIn. My designation is SCORE Cyber, so my initials SCOR and then Cyber, and those are the two best places to find me. As you know, I post a lot on LinkedIn, trying to educate people and whatnot. But it's always fun to try to scare the bejesus out of some folks, because you just don't realize all that's going on behind the scenes when you're scrolling through Instagram or posting something on TikTok or what have you.
Yeah, well, I think it's equal part fear and education, I think. So I think that's what we've provided today.
I've gone for the fear factor now because I've developed a bit of a reputation, so I've got to live up to it now.
Yep, I have seen some of those videos, and they have definitely scared the pants off of me. So thanks for the conversation, Sean. This has been terrific. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.